Have you ever watched someone make the same mistake, even after you warned them? Maybe it was your best friend, your partner, a family member. You gave them the perfect advice. Clear, logical, obviously correct. And they ignored every word. Why? It wasn't because your advice was wrong. It was because the human brain values freedom more than being right. And once you understand that, you'll never give advice the same way again. Here's what most people believe about advice. Good advice leads to better decisions. Simple logic. If the information is correct, the person should use it. But that's not what actually happens inside the brain. What actually happens looks more like this. Good advice arrives, and instead of being welcomed, it triggers a loss of autonomy. And that loss of autonomy triggers resistance. Not because the advice was bad, because it felt like control. Picture a simple scene. One stick figure walks up to another and says, "Here, let me help you with that." The second figure takes a step back, arms crossed, shaking its head, not because the help was useless, but because accepting it, in that moment, felt like giving something up. That's the paradox. The better the advice sounds, the more direct it is, the more likely it is to be rejected, because directness doesn't just deliver information. It delivers a decision the other person didn't get to make themselves. There's a name for this, and it's been studied since the 1960s. It's called psychological reactance, first described by psychologist Jack Brem. The idea is simple, no technical jargon required. Whenever a person feels that their freedom to choose is being threatened or reduced, their brain automatically pushes back, even against choices they might have made on their own. Here's what that looks like in real life. Someone says, "You should quit your job." And the brain's very first reaction isn't "let me think about this." It's "don't tell me what to do." Even if quitting was exactly the right move. Even if the person had already been thinking about it for months. The moment it's said as a command, the brain stops evaluating the content and starts defending its freedom to decide. This is why the exact same advice can land completely differently depending on how it's delivered. It was never really about the information. It was about whether the other person still felt like they were the one in charge of their own decision. Now here's the part most people never notice, and it's the strongest layer of all of this. When you give advice, even with the best intentions, even out of love, without realizing it, you're also sending a second message underneath the first one. And that second message is, "I know better than you." That's not an insult. It's not even conscious. But the other person's brain picks it up anyway, because status is something humans track constantly, in almost every interaction, whether we admit it or not. The moment that status gap opens up, even slightly, the other brain does something predictable. It tries to close it. And the easiest way to close a status gap without saying a word is simple. Ignore the advice. Prove, through action, that the decision is still theirs to make. This is why people will sometimes reject good advice, and then, weeks later, arrive at the exact same conclusion on their own, and feel proud of it. It was never really about the answer. It was about who got to own the decision. So if direct advice creates resistance, what actually works? Compare these two. "You should invest," versus, "What makes you hesitate about investing?" The first sentence hands over a conclusion. The second one hands over a question, and the brain experiences those two very differently. With the question, the other person's brain still feels like it's in the driver's seat. It's still doing the thinking. It's still arriving at its own answer, even if you're the one who guided it there. This isn't just intuition. It's the foundation of an entire field called motivational interviewing, developed by psychologists William Miller and Stephen Rolnick, originally used to help people change deeply resistant behaviors. Their core finding was consistent. People are far more likely to act on conclusions they discover themselves than on conclusions handed to them, no matter how correct those conclusions are. A question doesn't threaten autonomy. It protects it. And that single difference is often the entire reason one piece of advice gets ignored while another, saying almost the exact same thing, gets acted on. Here's where it all comes together. People listen more when you ask first. Not because asking is polite, although it is, but because asking transfers ownership of the conversation back to them before you've said anything at all. This is why the most effective psychologists, the best leaders, And the most skilled negotiators almost never start by advising. They start by asking. Something as simple as, "Do you want my honest opinion on this?" Or, "Do you just need to talk it through?" changes everything that follows. It gives the other person's brain permission to lower its guard, because the decision to receive advice was theirs. You didn't take control of the conversation. They handed it to you. That single moment of permission is often the difference between advice that gets absorbed and advice that gets defended against. If people keep ignoring your advice, maybe your advice isn't a problem. Maybe your timing is. Maybe your delivery is. Or maybe they never asked for it in the first place. Real influence doesn't begin with speaking. It begins with permission. If you want to understand the hidden psychology behind everyday human behavior, subscribe to Mind Decoded. Because every week, we decode the human mind.